Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining me today. Today, we're going to be talking some more about codependency, and I have a special guest. It's my boyfriend. How are you today?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good.
Good. This is going to be kind of an informal interview style video or recording, whatever you want to call it, since we're not showing our faces.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about your experiences with codependency and just kind of like, you know, just a different perspective. So it's going to be maybe a bit of a longer video again. So kind of sit tight, sit back, get yourself a drink, get yourself a blanket, and listen up if you want to. So please forgive us. We're going to have our notes here. So if you hear some more paper rustling, that's what that is. So can you kind of tell me about your background, your childhood, and how you feel like it kind of groomed you to become a codependent person?
Yeah. So growing up, I had mom and dad there, plus my siblings. It was a great childhood, From what I can remember, I had older sisters to kind of bug with. Summers were fun times where I got to go out and just kind of mess around with the backyard. Have ample amount of toys, so that was never an issue. Things were great. I think the whole dynamic kind of shifted when my parents got a divorce. I think I was in grade school, maybe fourth or fifth grade, and then from there I remember the dynamic, changing. So your parents are kind of different, their relationship and how they kind of treat you and each other. You kind of get to see that exposed, probably more so than a child should be exposed to. But I remember that's when that whole kind of shift happened. So it was a interesting kind of perspective from a child, but definitely, through their interactions and lack of it did kind of set the tone to kind of shape me into what I am or what I'm trying to fix today.
So after the divorce, well, first, can you tell me your you were a little child when they
Yeah.
divorced, like probably under the age of 10?
Yeah, I think so. I remember my parents, it was a course of actions. I remember, I guess, the tension kind of building up until they legally decided that they were going to get a divorce. So I remember being picked up by my mother after school. It was like early in the day, and she came pick me up. You kind of like a early dismissal kind of type thing. And I remember going down to the office, and there was my mom, and she took me home. And I guess that's the day that things were legalized, through the courts. So I didn't think much of it. But then I remember my dad, when he left me and my sisters, it was like, of course, emotional. Everyone was crying. It probably should have been handled more in a more appropriate way by the parents, but I think that they themselves weren't really thinking about that. They were more involved in their own emotions and whatever the case is. Of course, you're
Yeah.
going through a divorce. Things are, emotions are running high. And in retrospect, I think that as parents, to kind of explain things to the kids, they could have done it in a totally much better manner. But yeah, kids were crying and dad was crying. He left and that was it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's got to be super traumatic because, that's what the kids knew. And your sisters are a little bit older than you, so they probably took it a little bit harder.
Oh yeah, that
Yeah.
I think they were probably maybe becoming teenagers at that point in time. So on top of being a kid who's becoming a teenager, then you have to deal with this. I can only imagine kind of what type of things emotionally that they were having to deal with. So I think we all dealt with it in our own individual ways. So
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your dad first, please.
yes. So I don't have the greatest relationship with my biological father. He's an alcoholic. He has an addictive nature. Plus, on top of that, um, it goes without saying he's a narcissist. Reason why is because everything has to be catered around him, specifically how other people view him or how he wants to be viewed, kind of like leave a legacy kind of type personality. And we were just never attached. It's the weirdest kind of relationship. It was almost like the whole respectability premises. So growing up, it was like, here's a guy that would enjoy his cigarettes and coffee, sit in one spot, never really interacted with you unless if he had to get up or do something. Now, the addictive nature came in. Not only was he smoking, that's all I remember growing up was just being exposed to all that smoke or seeing rooms where the ceiling was just like yellow and they would have to paint over it. So that was a exposure that I thought was pretty much normal. And the addictive nature also was through alcohol. So here's a guy who would get up and pretty much, because, I was around him on the weekends, primarily that's when they would have their social get-together with other family and friends. Now, here I am as a small kid, and I remember waking up in the morning, we'll have our brunch, where my sisters and, uncle, mom, and dad are there. Then he'll take a nap.
So this was before the divorce then?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. This was before divorce. And as a kid, I would see two different types or two different sides of this man. One where he was sober, and after he would take a nap on the weekends, he would get up and start drinking. Now, it wasn't like a normal type of drinking, like casual. It was like, I bought a 24-pack and I'm going to down this all in just one day.
Wow.
That isn't like, if not more, because it's the weekends, it's the Saturdays, whatever the case was. And I remember as a little kid, saying to everyone, like my mom, uncle, and stuff, that, he's only okay when he's not drinking. Kind of joking around. And they kind of, laughed at it, chuckled. But I think in the back of their minds, it was resonating that, hey, this guy, he's an alcoholic, but no one did anything. They just kind of laughed at it, knowing that, hey, this person has a issue. And if a child who unconsciously blurts out stuff, because that's what kids do, for a child to kind of observe that and say that, it's something's wrong. Yeah. So.
I mean, I definitely think kids are smarter than people give them credit for. In my experience, and I don't want to talk too much about my own because this is about you today, but in my experience, it was always kind of, because I was an only child, so I was always around my parents. They didn't, unless I was at my grandma's house getting babysat, they didn't really have money to have a babysitter, so they were always just around me. So they would say things that I wasn't supposed to know or understand or be intellectual enough to know, but I think kids understand.
Yeah, and you kind of instinctually knew something just wasn't right.
Yeah, you feel uncomfortable, you feel weird, and that's for a totally different video, but my dad being kind of like a porn sex addict kind of a person, there was a lot of inappropriate things, and I'm sure you can probably, not with the sex stuff, but probably a lot of inappropriate stuff that you probably picked up on too growing up that you just were not comfortable and kind of icky with. Yeah,
I mean, definitely a bunch of grown men sitting around smoking and drinking from like, daytime into the wee hours of the morning or at night, and it's kind of like, did it not occur to any one of them, hey, there's children's here, there's families involved, and we're just drinking till who knows when.
Yeah. Gosh. Okay. Well, that's fun.
Yeah.
Can you kind of tell me about your mom, please?
Yeah. So, she, when I was younger, she was a stay-at-home mom. And I think during the course, maybe, leading up to their divorce, perhaps things got kind of rocky. I remember, or maybe it was a sense of escape or independence. I really don't know. But she got a job, just working retail, somewhere close by. And I remember, things kind of led up to the point where they would ultimately get a divorce, and she would become the sole provider of the household. Um, Growing up, she was, I was really always by her side. I think the one thing that she never established in me was that independence or that confidence growing up. Mm-hmm. So that didn't help me as much into adulthood, because my role basically revolved around her, where, I didn't have a lot of confidence, and the reassurance in my, lack of, what's the word, self-confidence, I couldn't really gain that, because if the world was disastrous or if there's some sort of negativity that's going on, I would look to her and she would kind of reassure that worrisome kind of type behavior. Yeah. It's kind of weird to say, but I never really get a chance to have that confidence to like really explore, find things, just discover myself in the process from a child into adulthood. And it was always, the world is a big scary place, and as long as you meet my demands as a parent, as a mother, you're a good kid in my eyes, then that's the only time that you're doing something right. And I think that really shifted and kind of took its toll. It took a turn for the worse as I got older.
Yeah. Do you think that your mom being an immigrant, or having an immigrant family, maybe that had something to do with, her being afraid of the world herself and kind of carrying that over to you?
Yeah, I think it definitely has a part to play into it. They went through a traumatic kind of type of ordeal during that time, my parents, and many of their close friends and associates at that time, which got them to the States. With that being said, I think that it's her fear, perhaps, maybe in society, or maybe through the traumatic events that kind of caused her to be very defensive or reserved. And from that, I kind of picked that up too, because she was the go-to parent that I would, associate or be affiliated to so often. Mm-hmm. As a child, you look up to that parent. And who knows, prior to whatever the situation was that caused them to, immigrate to
the States.
Yeah. Who knows what kind of childhood and other traumatic events that they experienced prior to that led them to basically be the parents that they were, So there's a lot of different, I think, elements that kind of play into this, but definitely that probably impacted them.
Yeah. Wow. Well, so I kind of touched on this before with my own family, but we kind of talked about this, and we kind of came to the conclusion that perhaps your mother is a borderline personality disordered person, mm-hmm. to the degree of being on the malignant end of the spectrum. Can you tell me the kinds of things that she would do, even as a child up until your adulthood, that would kind of set you off, or that would kind of show you that maybe she did have some kind of a personality disorder, or that there was something not quite right?
Yeah, sure thing. So some of the things with living with mom, and it kind of sounds like a whole Norman Bates psycho kind of type thing that's going on. In terms where she kind of dictated everything. So growing up with my mom, she controlled pretty much everything. So you were disobedient if you kind of talked back, or if you had an opinion at all. Basically, the way that she treated you was the same as when she treated you when you were 5 or younger. So I think the way that she treated me as I got older, became a teenager, kind of wanted to rebel.
Which is natural.
Yeah. It should have been a natural progression, but it never was, So that, in some weird ways, through her thought logic, I really think it kind of stunted me, because I became very disassociated from wanting to interact with other kids my age, all I really did was just play video games. And I found that as my escape into wanting to get away by playing these games hours on end. And I know that's a different time, a different subject for a different time.
Which we can get into, yeah,
Sure.
if you want to later.
But yeah, definitely living with her, it was very interesting, you know. She reinforced that fear, I think, so I didn't want to try as much. So, you know, again, the world, it's scary out there. Who are you hanging out with? They're bad influence on you. You should stay home, or I don't trust them, you know. So that kind of made me want to, of course, you know, your parents knows best, and you didn't want to upset them.
Yeah.
Because she would fly off the handle on top of that. So if you were to talk back to her, she would throw that whole authoritative parent BS down, you know, which you're kind of, in thinking about it now, it's like, well, there's reasonable ways where you can interact and talk with your children. She didn't. Whatever she said was rule, and that was how the household was.
Yeah.
Other odd things growing up, and I don't know. I think I also developed some sort of weird social phobia with eating.
Oh,
you know?
right, yeah.
So yeah, this was very interesting or unique. It's not bulimia. It's not anorexia.
So it's like an unknown kind of eating disorder.
I'm sure there's, yeah.
Something.
So I basically developed this as well into my young childhood, where I would get very nervous in a social setting, and I wouldn't want to eat in a social place because it was that fear of, oh, is everyone looking at me? Or, you know, what if they view me differently? Whatever the case was. It was this insecurity. So if we were to go out on a family outing, or there's a family reunion, or whatever the case was, I would just, you know, gag. Like, the near thought of eating out in a public place as a kid, you know, made me feel very nauseous. And they knew that, you know, my mom knew that. And it was almost like, oh, that's just a little quirk of my son, blah, blah, blah. Any normal parent would be like, hey, that's not right. What's really causing this, you know? Yeah. And this basically affected me well into, I guess, my early 20s. Ultimately, I was able to get over this phobia. You know, we've eaten out many times.
Yeah,
I love
you've been
food.
fine since I've known you. You've been okay,
but
so.
I think it was something more mental that kind of stopped me, you know, and I think it was kind of reinforced by her in those scenarios. I remember being as a kid and just eating a piece of candy that my sister, you know, gave me. It was like a now later, or, you know, some sort of sweet
taffy kind of
something.
Okay.
So I remember specifically because you remember weird events as a kid or whatever.
Yeah.
And she would take me casually. We'll go into the bathroom, and she would make me throw up that piece of candy. Now, I think her reasoning or her excuse was, oh, he's going to choke on it. You know, she would say to my sisters, and why did you give him a piece of candy? Now, I'm a kid. I can't communicate. I'm not a toddler at that point.
Right.
I could walk around. I could form. I was like maybe 5, 6.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember she would like take her finger, put it down my throat, and make me gag until I threw it up.
Oh.
Didn't say anything at all. But during the course of this interaction, and it happened multiple times, you know, not in that one day, but, you know.
Over the course of time.
Right.
Okay.
I just thought at that time as a kid, this is weird, but I didn't question it or say anything. It was like this unique, weird moment of silence that this was going on until it happened, and then she would act like it never happened. So I don't know if she found some sort of really weird twisted pleasure in kind of like a torture kind of type thing.
Probably.
You know, to kind of satiate some sort of fixation, or I really don't know. But I remember that was the norm. So whenever I ate a piece of candy as a kid I was like, oh no, that's going to happen again.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying because of that incident, it led me into my whole social eating phobia thing that I was so afraid of. But
it might have something to do with it.
It may have.
You know, who knows?
Some sort of traumatic kind of type of unconscientious thing that kind of got me all messed up.
Yeah.
But what I can say about the whole eating thing was it's a weird sensation. You're sitting there, you're eating fine with your family, friends, or party, and then suddenly, it's like the room goes silent, and you can hear as other people are interacting around you. It's almost like everything is being muffled, and then your inner voice is talking to you or something. And at that moment in time, you feel very insecure.
Yeah.
And then you feel like every eyes is on you. And the only thing you can do is excuse yourself to the bathroom just to, vomit or whatever the case was. And this would happen multiple times in one outing.
Oh, wow. Oh.
So let's say if it's kind of descriptive, so sorry
That's fine.
about that, guys.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's just, we talked about this before. It's such a weird kind of experience. But, yeah, I'm not going through this now.
Thank God.
Yeah, I love food and I love to cook. So it's a really positive thing in my life right now. But, yeah, this whole kind of situation or this matter, whatever phobia it was such a weird moment in my life that basically hung on for the majority of my life. And I just remember like feeling temporary relief if I excused myself multiple times. It could flare back up again. And my family knew about this, growing up. They brought it to my attention, but I don't think, it was handled in the correct manner to try to get me to that place where I felt confident. Instead, it was like, you're doing this, we know it, and something's wrong with you. Okay, so if a person
and
doesn't
you should
have,
stop, basically.
Yeah, if I had an on-off switch, I totally would have done that. But so. Anyways, going off on the tangent, that was kind of like the weird things that happened with Mom.
So, being a borderline personality disorder, I'm one of these days I'm gonna read out what all the personality disorders of a borderline on. But one of them, as I've said before, is narcissistic personality disorder. I think like avoidant personality disorder. There's like a bunch. Like I think there's like 10 or more that they borderline on. But one of the traits with the narcissistic personality disorder is, and probably some of the others, is not having good boundaries.
Yeah.
And I know with my own father, boundaries were nothing. It's basically like you are his arm or his finger. It's probably the same thing with your mom. It's kind of like there was no boundaries. She would probably do and say anything and kind of involve you. It kind of takes me to my next subject was with her. I don't know if a lot of our listeners may have heard of it, but there is something called covert incest. And when people hear the word incest, they just recoil, oh my God, Well, incest doesn't necessarily have to do with physical touching. It can also be mental as well. A lot of the times you will have a parent going to one of their children and kind of making them into a surrogate husband or wife because they feel like they can't or they don't want to go to their own husband or wife, that they feel that they can't. There's a really good book on that. Let me see if I can find the title and the author that I really enjoyed, and that was really in depth about incest in general, but they really went over covert incest specifically. See if I can find it. Sorry guys, I should have had this. It's called Silently Seduced. It's when parents make their children partners. It is by Kenneth M. Adams. And it's really interesting to read because the reason why I was looking at it is because my mom, she didn't necessarily make me her wife or anything weird like that, but she would come to me with her marital problems when I was a child, and these are things I shouldn't have been knowing about or hearing about her problems with my father, but she really felt like she had nowhere else to go besides me. Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, absolutely, and just like your experience, my mother, she would come to me and kind of explain to me like, I'm the only person that would trust her or that she has that she can depend on. basically making me into, that one kind of individual that she can tell all her problems to. She would often, I think, pin me and my siblings against one another. She said, your sisters, they're not as close to me. They don't care or don't love me or whatever the case was. So I can only tell you or count on you because you love me, kind of type scenario.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that wasn't quite fun. But I remember being as a kid, you're hearing that from your mother in this scenario. And you're thinking, well, I have to do everything that I can to kind of be there for her. And I can't let her down because I'm all that she's got, and you're being told that repeatedly. So my mom ended up with someone where we go from my biological father, who's an alcoholic and narcissist, has his own ways. We were never involved to that extent, my father and I. We never really had that close kind of relationship.
It was kind of hands off.
Yeah, when he was gone, he was gone. While I did come and see him on the weekends, he didn't really care. It was almost like having a living, breathing organism that's just sitting there, smoking, drinking, totally far away from you that you couldn't bond with. So my mom ended up with someone who I believe is a narcissist as well. This guy, he's very much more abusive, and he basically love bombed her when they first met. So he probably said all the right things, fed her all the stuff that she needed to hear. Well, it drove a wedge between her relationship with her children. My sisters, they separated themselves from her. I remember my middle sister moving out the house. She got into an altercation with my mom. It wasn't just one, it was gradual over the course of time until the point where she had enough and she left, I think, when she was 16 to live with my dad. My older sister was out of the home because she was in college at that time, so she kind of had her, new beginning away from all the traumatic thing that happened. And I'm being the youngest, I get stuck there with mom and her new guy.
Yeah.
Well, he's very abusive verbally, physically. He also drinks and smokes, so he has an addictive nature. And it became, in a sense, where you felt like a prisoner in your own home as a kid. So I would turn to other things, addictive nature myself as a kid, which was through video games or whatever the case was. And that was my, time where I could just escape reality. But during the course of this, she would come to me and just basically tell me, hey, this and that's happening. Or I remember one time, again, the subject where children shouldn't be exposed to, these kind of dynamics.
Okay, yeah.
Where they had an altercation. It didn't turn physical, but he was verbally being abusive to her. She's crying in tears. And again, I think I was in middle school. And she comes up to me and she tells me to tell him to stop. So
why get you involved at all?
Yes, in a fit of rage where he's cursing, potentially being violent or whatever the case was. Here's your mom weeping, who's put you in this situation many times. She's coming to you in tears, telling you to tell a violent person who's not in their right mind, right, to stop. Yeah. So I remember yelling out the hallway, stop, and that didn't stop. He just went on more of a tirade, yelling, cursing her name, all this swearing, telling her like, oh, so now you're having your kid involved kind of type thing. So you go from my biological father into something much worse than this creature of a man who is doing this, and his switch and excuse was alcohol. So whenever he consumed it, he could be as nasty as he wanted. And here's my mother, and she's putting up with that while introducing and incorporating her children, in my case me, into this lifestyle for years on end. So it wasn't just like it came and went away. This was like the duration of time when I was in grade school. They were divorced up until, I don't know, maybe when I was like 18 or...
So just over that period. Yeah. Jeez, that's terrible. I'm so sorry that
It
all that had to happen. It's ridiculous.
it happened, and I'm just glad that we could get ourselves out of our own situations. And it's a complex kind of scenario, but and not to say that my situation's greater than yours or anybody else, but thankfully we're at the point in our lives where we can take ourselves out of
The
that
situation,
situation.
yeah. I mean, I always say, it's not a contest. It's not a who suffered the most contest. I mean, everybody, even if it's as dramatic as, your childhood, or even if it's just little subtle things, abuse is abuse. It doesn't matter if it's affecting you in a negative way, and if it's not building you up and making you into a better person, then it's bad and it needs to stop.
Yeah, even though I wasn't physically abused, I mean, just by being exposed to that, I think that psychologically it definitely does impair you.
Of course.
For a child to go through that, and then very next day of school, you're trying to be like, oh, nothing happened. And I think that was kind of a contribution as to why I was like so reserved as a kid. I wasn't outgoing. I kind of kept to myself, I wasn't a outcast, even though deep down inside I felt different than other kids.
Mm-hmm.
But I pretty much got along with everyone. Very soft, quiet, kid. Everyone liked me. I got along with just pretty much anybody, and I guess that's a whole codependency kind of element in me coming out as well.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to, appease and kind of be able to mesh in with different things whenever the scenario is needed. But no one would have known that this is what's happening, or this is the type of crap that a kid was being exposed to or had to go through. I held it down and kind of hit it pretty well. So,
and I wonder how many abuse survivors are the same way, trying to act like everything is normal when obviously things just aren't. So I think I'm going to end the first part here, and then we'll kind of break it up into a couple different videos. So stay tuned for part 2.